Hi, I'm Denise Gorse, web editor at Loyola Press, a Jesuit ministry in Chicago. I'm also a catechist. Welcome to our event today, the Catechist's Toolbox 2.0, a webinar with Dr. Joe Paprocki. Thank you for being here. Before I turn the mic over to Joe, a few housekeeping details. First of all, this webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be available within a few days. The link will be sent to all registered participants, and you are welcome to share that link with friends and colleagues. We are in webinar mode, which means you will not be able to unmute yourself or open your camera. You'll only be able to hear and see Joe as our presenter today, and me. I'll be here to facilitate any questions you have as we go along. And if you have questions for Joe during the presentation, please use the Q&A feature to leave those, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end of our hour together. Now I have the privilege of introducing to you our webinar speaker, who has been a Loyola Press colleague for many years. Joe Paprocki is National Consultant for Faith Formation at Loyola Press. He has spent his lifetime in ministry work, presenting keynotes and workshops across North America. He's the author of more than 20 books, including his newest, The Catechist Toolbox 2.0, Building Today's Missionary Disciples, which you'll hear more about today. So we can advance the slide. We'll get started here now.
Alrighty.
And so the original Catechist Toolbox has sold more than 150,000 copies. Wow. And remains one of the most recognized resources in the catechetical field. Now in the Catechist Toolbox 2.0, Joe brings us a revised and updated edition that addresses changes for faith formation in our digital world. We'll learn some lessons from Joe's book in our time together this afternoon. And now, take it away and tell us more, Joe.
Thanks so much, Denise. Always a pleasure to have you here with me. As Denise mentioned, she's also a catechist, so it's really nice that both of us can lean back on our catechetical experience and tell stories that have some street cred to them. So thanks so much, Denise. We're going to be seeing you a few more times as we progress. Thank you to everyone for being here. An honor to be the guest, I guess I could call myself for this webinar to talk about the Catechist Toolbox 2.0. Basically what we're going to be looking at is, how do we proclaim a timeless message? The gospel is timeless, but how do we proclaim that in a changing world? And we are living in a world that is changing rapidly. Technology is really rewiring our brains in many ways, affecting the way that we think and we learn and we interact with each other and so on. So it really stands to reason then that it's going to affect the way we teach as well. And as catechists, it's important for us to pay attention to that. So on your screen, you see the new Catechist Toolbox 2.0. You'll also see the QR code, which we will show you again at the end, the conclusion of this webinar, but I'll just leave it up there for another second or two. But Denise and I were just kidding each other before we started that the original Catechist Toolbox came out in 2007. And that's 18 years ago. And I was going to jokingly ask her, Denise, what were you doing, 18 years ago? And it turns out both of us were right here at Loyola Press. But a lot has changed since 2007. And I just wanted to show you, it doesn't sound like that long ago, but 18 years. Try this on for size. Prince performed at the Super Bowl halftime show. Tiger Woods won his fourth PGA championship. Remember Tiger Woods? The Sopranos TV show came to an end, alas, and Keeping Up with the Kardashians had its premiere. And to this day, I've still never watched an episode. Anyway, REM was voted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Remember REM? And a fellow by the name of Barry Bonds surpassed Hank Aaron as the all-time Major League Baseball home run leader. It seems like we're reaching back there pretty far. But there's one change since 2007 that was seismic. And I'm not using hyperbole there. It has changed the world. And it was in that year that Steve Jobs and Apple introduced the iPhone, the smartphone. And nothing has been the same since. And what we want to do here is take a little look at the impact of this. I want to point out that this entire book, The Catechist Toolbox 2.0, is simply not about the changes that the smartphone has brought about, but it serves as the introduction and the thrust through the book of renewing ourselves. Everything that was in the original toolbox that you see on your screen is in the new Toolbox 2.0, updated, sharpened up, and so on, and then lots added. And I'll share more of that at the end with you. But I want to talk a little bit more about this notion of the impact that technology has had on us, and especially the introduction of the smartphone. Um, there's a wonderful author and professor, Dr. Jean Twenge, I think is how you pronounce her last name. And she says that the smartphone brought about a planetary rewiring of human interaction. That's profound words. As smartphones became common, they transformed peer relationships, family relationships, and the texture of daily life for everyone. And so, we think differently, we interact differently, we relate differently, we act differently. And maybe we're not so much aware of it because this has happened gradually over time, but it is significant. Um, Something for us to be aware of is that, and I think we know this, that screen time is addictive, that we become addicted to what we call a dopamine rush that comes with screen time. So when we get notifications, when there are social media interactions and other features that they activate the brain's reward system and they lead to a temporary feeling of excitement and pleasure and a desire for more. And that results in a cycle of compulsively checking our phones. I confess, I fall into this on pretty much a daily basis, and it's something that I'm trying to be more and more aware of. But there is an addictive nature to this, and something that really can become a compulsive thing. Now, as a result, there are some effects to this, and especially for our young people. Before I get into this, I do want to give a disclaimer. I am not here to bash the smartphone. I'm not here to bash the technology and to be nostalgic instead and say, let's do away with these. I'm going to start by pointing out some of the things that we need to be aware of that can be toxic, but talk about how we can use technology to our advantage as evangelizers and catechists. So, just a quick look at this. We know that a lot of screen time results in decreased attention span, increased need for visual stimulation, avoidance of non-screen tasks. If there's not a screen involved, sometimes there's an avoidance of doing anything. Moodiness, shifts in moods, poor emotional regulation, a feeling of being overwhelmed and overloaded by so much stimuli, a tendency towards being bombarded with a lot of superficiality. What else? It can also cause within us a loss of impulse control. Have you ever just shut off a comment on social media and then said, oops, probably shouldn't have said that? We become impulsive or buy something. Ooh, I see that. That looks cool. Boom, put it in my shopping cart. Bing, the bill comes. So loss of impulse control. Uh, it can cause difficulty in initiating tasks because it can also cause a lack of sleep and sluggishness. It increases our anxiety. This is one of the big things that experts are telling us that the smartphone has, in many ways, increased anxiety when it was supposed to help us be more leisurely and so on. Um, Another interesting fact is that we can kind of customize our world by having a screen on, and then we kind of expect to have everything customized for us outside of screen time as well. And then finally, it also increases fragmentation, polarization, loneliness, uh, lack of purpose, and so on. But I'm going to stop there because important disclaimer, as I said, I don't want to sound like this is all bad stuff. We got to get rid of these things. No, but let's be aware of these things. And I think we are already, as parents and as catechists, we're aware of these, some of the more toxic features. But we're going to take a look at and be mindful of approaches that are most beneficial for us to use technology. And you're going to see that I'm a firm believer in using technology in our faith formation. And so the Catechist Toolbox 2.0, it's not a call to make faith formation a digital reality that you all have to become tech wizards and everything has to be done digitally. But on the other hand, it is not a nostalgia call to get rid of technology or get rid of smartphones and return to simpler times. It's a mixture of both. Let's make sure that we are including simplicity and non-screen time in our faith formation settings. But let's also use technology to our advantage to proclaim the good news of Jesus as effectively as possible. And so, we're going to talk about how today's catechists, using the Catechist Toolbox 2.0, can and must respond to these realities. This is a call to recognizing how technology is creating new ways of learning and how we as catechists can develop more effective strategies. And at the same time, safeguard against some of technology's more harmful or toxic effects. But definitely, it is a tool for us to more effectively proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ. So, without further ado, we're going to jump into tools. A toolbox. I got my toolbox here off to the side of me. Has to be filled with effective tools. And so, this is what I'm going to be sharing with you, or what are some of the tools that the 21st century catechist needs to have in their toolbox and to be able to call on to be more effective. First thing we're going to talk about is the fact that 21st century learners are used to switching tasks frequently and they have shorter attention spans. So, what happens when they come into our room and we decide we're going to have them sit there for 45 minutes to an hour while we read and discuss from a textbook? If that's all we do, folks, we don't stand much of a chance of really penetrating their minds and hearts. What we need to do is to adapt a strategy, a tool called chunking, just as you see on your screen. Chunking, that means breaking our lessons down into smaller segments. Think of it almost as like a game show on TV. Not only is the show interrupted by commercials every 7 or 8 minutes, so there's chunking happening there, but even within that game show, there are different parts of the game that they play and they move from this venue to that venue to this contest to this other contest and so on. And it's constantly changing. So we need to think about how do we divide an hour session, a 45-minute session, a 90-minute session into briefer chunks of time so that we make sure we're switching tasks and we're also shifting energy. That's the important thing, is that we need to shift the energy of our participants in particular. So we're going to shift energy a little bit here and do a little chunking of our own and invite you to engage in a poll question. We haven't done one of these for a while on our webinars. And I was just going to say, pray for us that we remember how to do it. But Denise just pulled up the first question. So we're asking you here, during a typical faith formation session, I or we switch tasks. So I as a catechist or we as a classroom switch tasks, I should say. Um, First choice, 3 or fewer times. Second choice, 4 to 6 times. Third choice, 7 to 8 times. And the last choice, 9 or more times. And people are answering that right now. In the meantime, Denise, how about you? You've been a catechist for many years. Do you chunk?
I have. I didn't realize I wasn't calling it chunking,
Okay.
but yeah, I start out and there's always an opening activity while the kids are gathering because they come in at scattered times. We have our opening prayer. And then I always be sure later in the session to have a dedicated time for an expanded prayer experience. And then throughout, yes, we use the textbook, but sometimes there's a game, sometimes there's a craft project, all sorts of ways to use that chunking time.
Yeah, thanks, Denise. I mean, that's exactly what I'm talking about here is just, making sure you're shifting the energy from time to time. Using a textbook, that's crucial. I use a textbook when I teach, but if you're chunking, that means you're using it, moving off of it, coming back to it, moving off of it. So we have to get their noses out of the textbook from time to time as well. All right, Denise, show us what we got here. We're looking at it, but tell us what we got.
All right. So looks like the majority, just a slim majority, says 4 to 6 times. Some folks are picking 3 or fewer times. So not practicing chunking just yet, but maybe they'll be inspired by
Hmm.
today's session to do that. But definitely everybody's changing pace,
Yeah,
changing activities as they go through the class.
excellent. Well, thanks, Denise, and thanks everyone for participating in that first poll. I would probably be one of those the few who said 9 or more times. I'm a chunker, and so I'm constantly, moving on to different things in a session. But we're going to stop sharing that and get that off my screen, and we should be ready to move on. I'm going to share with you at least 4 chunks. Okay, at least 4 chunks that should be part of your lesson. And in many ways, Denise just kind of hinted at it when she referred to what she does. All of these are part of the journey that St. Ignatius said begin by entering through their door, but being sure that you leave through your door. So think of this as, the chunking as, parts of this journey from entering through their door, their life, and but leaving through what we say is our door, or the door that leads to a new way of thinking, speaking, and acting that's informed by Jesus Christ. So, without further ado, first thing is to engage the learners that are there. Spend about 10 minutes connecting with them where they're at. Um, Many people, and this is part of the digital age today too, begin sessions by having people check in. That's a phrase that comes to us from the social media world, that people check in and give a brief synopsis of, how they're feeling at the moment. This is a wonderful way to begin by just going around and maybe give like a multiple choice and say, so tell us whether you're, happy, sad, mad, glad, or, some other adjectives, and just go around and have everyone sort of check in. And, you can learn a lot by just having, someone utter a word or two about how they're feeling at the moment. And it might make you sensitive to why they're perhaps not participating the way you had hoped, and so on. But in addition to that, having a prayer ritual. So again, not just, we're going to talk about this, not just saying an opening prayer, but engaging in a prayer ritual. So that might involve playing music, having a procession, setting up a prayer table, a ritual greeting, the threefold sign of the cross on our forehead, lips, and our heart, passing a bowl of holy water, reading from scripture. That's what we mean by a prayer ritual, prayer experience. Engaging the young people or learners in an icebreaker, something that not just for fun, not just for a laugh, but something that also gets us thinking about the focus of this lesson. And then really establishing that lesson, making clear why are we here today? And we're here, and it always comes down to the fact that there's something broken, and the gospel is that we're going to preach is going to offer healing for that. Okay, that's always, whenever you teach a lesson, something's broken or missing, and what we're going to proclaim offers a fix to that. So that's the engaged part. The second chunk, probably the longest chunk of your lesson, but even that chunk should be broken down into smaller chunks. First chunk during the explore is review what you did last week. So anyone remember what we learned last week? Throw out a word and say, what did we learn about this? What did we learn about that? Prod their memories a little bit. So review, connect to what was learned before. Present the content, which is for many of us reading the textbook, which thank God we have textbooks that provide for us comprehensive explanation of our faith that can touch hearts and change minds and transmit the totality of our faith faithfully and comprehensively. So, but break up reading from a textbook. Get a little squishy ball and toss the ball around to take turns. Here, you toss it to Denise, and she starts to read, and then say, Denise, toss it to the next person. And you just develop a little bit of keeping that energy flowing while we're reading from a book and stopping and talking and asking questions. Another perhaps less gimmicky thing is, pass a little flameless candle around as kind of a symbol of our baptism or being the light of Christ. Every person who reads holds that little candle. Um, when you're done reading and discussing and so on, perhaps show a video, a short video. It doesn't have to be a full-length movie. 3, 5, 7 minutes, something that you either found through your curriculum. Loyola Press curriculum have QR codes, which we're going to be showing you in a moment, that you can scan and show a video right there. You don't have to bring in a projector anymore. You don't have to bring in a TV, VCR, DVD player. You can have a tablet, a phone, scan, voila, you're seeing a video. Or you can look up something ahead of time on YouTube. And then finally, some kind of a reinforcement activity. Maybe it's a worksheet from, the Blackline masters of your program. Maybe it's a crossword puzzle. Perhaps it's a craft you're going to do, something that reinforces the theme of what you've been learning. The third chunk, and again, Denise beautifully referred to this. She takes dedicated time for prayer. She said, we return to a dedicated time for prayer. So, in addition to an opening prayer experience, she and many other catechists, including myself, return to maybe a 10-minute segment where we engage in a prayer experience. And these are usually an opportunity for the learners to interact with Jesus. And so you and I, as catechists, are facilitators of an encounter. And we invite them to imagine Jesus sitting with them or walking with them, and they have a conversation with them as a powerful way to touch the hearts of those that we are forming in faith. And then finally, as we're getting ready to send them out through our door, the response step, which is a chunk at the end of your session where you're beginning to focus on an outward motion. The gospel is always moving out into the world. We sometimes retreat, and in many ways, our catechesis is a retreat so that we are sent back out. And so, what do? You can spend a couple of minutes assessing. Did they learn what they were supposed to learn? Nothing wrong with giving little quizzes, a little test here and there. Not to decide if they pass or fail or are worthy of a sacrament or anything, but to see if they can show what they know. And you can assess, did they learn? Do they know what I wanted them to learn? And if not, perhaps I need to revisit it and teach it again. Talk about some strategies now for going out into the world. If we talked about loving our enemies, so what are some things we can do in the coming week? And invite them to brainstorm. It's got to be realistic. Where's the rubber going to hit the road and how's that going to happen? And then finally, bringing them together one more time for a closing prayer experience, briefer than the others, but it can still involve things like exchanging a sign of peace with one another before we leave, um, blessing ourselves with holy water before we leave, singing a song as a way of bringing our session to a close, and so on. So those are at least four chunks that I want to leave you with: the engage, explore, reflect, and respond steps. Folks, if you have a question for me, I invite you to go into the Q&A feature and to put that question in there. And a little bit later on, Denise will be facilitating that Q&A for us. Let's move on to another tool to tackle one of these 21st century challenges. And 21st century learners rely on visual and audio stimuli. They are almost always connected to something. And so I wear hearing aids, and one of my brothers does too. And he said, you know what? It used to be kind of a stigma to walk around with hearing aids, but he says now everyone has something sticking out of their ears. And it's true, So, everyone's walking around with audio stimuli or visual stimuli, looking at their phone and so on. Our directory for catechesis warns us, and I think this is one of the most powerful lines for a catechist to remember in terms of methodology. It says that failing adequately to consider digital phenomena, doesn't say to adapt to everything, but to consider digital phenomena leads to the risk of appearing insignificant to many people, especially young people. In other words, if we're not using technology, they will come to the conclusion that it must not be important because most everything I think is important, I access through technology. Think about that. Back in the day, Marshall McLuhan coined the phrase, the medium is the message. That might be a bit of hyperbole, but there's some truth to that. The medium is the message. And so if the medium that we're using does not include technology, the message that they're picking up, whether intended or not, may very well be that this really isn't all that significant or it's not all that relevant. Really very important for us to think about those ramifications. All right, we're chunking again. We're moving on to another activity to interrupt, keep our flow going here. We're inviting Denise back for the next poll question. And here we're asking you about technology. So in your faith formation sessions, I use technology or a multimedia. First choice, never. Next choice, occasionally. Third choice, often. And fourth choice, all the time, which means it's always present in your teaching. How about you, Denise? And maybe tell us where you're at now and how you've gotten there. Has there been a gradual increase over the years in terms of how you use technology?
Oh, there's definitely been an increase as technology has changed and as accessibility within the learning space has changed. The last couple of years, I had access to a smart board. Well, that opens up some different possibilities. I know not every catechist has opportunities to use that kind
Right.
of technology, but sometimes it's just as simple as holding up my own phone to play a recording, whether that's music or a reflection, an audio
Yeah.
recording of a prayer in another language, all sorts of possibilities.
Great. Again, Denise, thanks. I mean, you share with us just real everyday examples of a catechist, and it doesn't have to be something that is, so highly technical that, you need a degree in, some kind of technology. But folks are telling us here about 5% say they never do. We're going to encourage you to move on to the next category and be an occasional at least, grow where you are, get a little bit more used to this. 33% say occasionally, 41% say often. I'm very gladdened to see that. I think that's very good. And 22% say all the time. I think we're going to see a lot of those people who say often be maybe moving into the all the time. Everyone should be growing in this. And so thank you everyone for participating in that. And Denise for running the poll and sharing your own thoughts with us. And I'm going to close that out on my screen. And once again, move on to talk a little bit about, I'm going to share with you 4 examples of what I consider to be the minimum that a catechist should be able to do. And so, for those of you who said you never use technology, I'm going to invite you to choose at least one of these in the current year to say, okay, I'm going to try this. And it starts with something that Denise, I think she gave a very good, simple example. We should be able to use our smartphone and perhaps a speaker if your room is big. But if your room is not that large, you don't even need a speaker. But to use a phone to play music. I just think it's one of the most simple things a catechist can learn and can rely on, and it makes a world of difference. I constantly played music in my rooms. I would have music on as they were arriving. I want them to arrive with music playing, liturgical music usually, something that makes them feel like they're walking into church at the moment. Using music for the opening prayer, returning to music for that extended reflection step, using music at part of the closing prayer. Um, Bare minimum. That should be a very simple thing that I would encourage you to try. The next thing that I suggest is using QR codes. You see an example of one on there that's taken from one of our Loyola Press books, and I believe that Denise reminded me that QR code actually works. So if someone, wanted right now to have their phone and scan that, I think it's going to take you to a video. I'm not sure, but anyway, being able to scan a QR code and to show it on probably a tablet. It's really hard to have a whole class look at your phone to watch something. But if you have a tablet, to be able to scan and then hold up your tablet. And then folks are become more proficient at being able to scan something and show it on a smart board. Scan something and be able to show it on a screen, projection screen, and so on. Before I go any further, I want to encourage you to think of um, making sure that you have a catechist aid. I think that's a good idea to always have a catechist aid, but more so now than ever before to help you with technology. Get a teenager or young adult in particular to be your IT director in your class, in your room, and someone that you can turn to, a high school student, a college student, a young adult. Live and breathe this stuff. That you ask them to put together a playlist of songs, they'll say, okay, which songs? They're not going to say, how do I do that? Um, and so go out and find someone. Maybe it's, one of your own children, a niece, a nephew, someone, a neighbor, someone you can bring along and have be your IT person, your technology person in your learning space. Two more minimum things that I think that when I say minimum, I'm thinking these are the easiest things. And that is to use an LCD projector for slide presentations. You notice that every webinar that I do, we have a slide presentation that goes with it. I'm a visual learner. And I have found that because I like visuals, I always include them, that I get a lot of comments from people who appreciate the visuals. We have a lot of visual learners. So learning how to put together a slide presentation on your computer, on your laptop, on your tablet, and be able to connect that to a projector and show that on a screen. Some of your rooms have this built in. Talk to your catechetical leader, find out what equipment is available, and take advantage of that. Finally, the last one, the smartphones themselves. There's something to be said for teachers and catechists who have all their learners come in and put their phones in a basket and they move them off to the side. I get that. There's something to be said for that. I, however, would like to see a middle ground that put them away when they're not needed, but let's pull them back out and have them use those smartphones to find things, have them look up stories of the saints, lives of the saints, have them look up scripture passages, have them look up the Vatican website, have them look up something in the catechism. I know a lot of catechists do this already, and I would encourage you to take that on. Finally, one more thing that for you to be aware of is that your publisher, and I know Loyola Press, we provide lots of things that are online that learners can use their smartphones or you can use a tablet to tap into games and activities, review games, and so on that help to reinforce the learning. And they're lots of fun for us to do as well. All right, let's move on. We're going at a breakneck pace, but folks, all of this is in the book, The Catechist Toolbox 2.0. So if I went through something a little too fast, make sure you get the book and you'll have time to go through it at your own pace. So, because our learners nowadays are so accustomed to having things customized, I mean, you make your own playlist, you make your own watch list, we make favorites, we customize everything. There is a tendency now to transfer that to everything else around us. Now, on the one hand, that's unrealistic. On the other hand, there are some ways that we can connect with that, and that is by customizing how we present our material and also how we assess what they're learning, paying attention to learning styles. All of us learn differently and express ourselves differently. And we refer to these as multiple intelligences. There's a whole section in the 2.0 book about this, but not everybody learns or expresses through words, whether written or spoken. Many people focus on expressing themselves musically, through logic and math, through art and space, physical activity, nature, interaction, introspection. So, what does that mean? It could mean that we use music maybe instead of words, instead of always talking. Can we find a song that captures what the text is saying? You know, read the text, talk about the text, play a song that reinforces it. Um, Read a text and discuss a text and do a craft or have them draw or express something through art. And so we can tap into the uniqueness of all of our learners by customizing our own lessons and also the way that we invite them to express themselves. Next up, we know that the smartphones are causing our young people to feel overwhelmed, overloaded. It's resulting in an experience of anxiety, uncertainty, a lot of superficiality. So, the flip side of all of this is that we have got to be the place where they can also get a break from screen time. Okay? So, remember I said I was going to make that very clear. How can we use technology? But I also believe very strongly we have to be the place where they can experience quiet, they can experience solitude, mystery, depth instead of superficiality. In doing so, we facilitate encounters with the sacred. And we have at our fingertips a language for that. I've written about this in many of my books. This is all in the Catechist Toolbox 2.0, the language of mystery, um, that we speak to our learners by paying attention to things like the space, a visual prayer space, something that they walk in and they see speaks of the sacred without us even saying a word. Music and song, we've already talked about how music can set a tone, how it can help to express some of what we're talking about. Periods of silence, taking a moment or two to just let's collect ourselves in silence. I was on a Zoom meeting the other day with a pastor and three of his staff members. And the staff member said, Father, would you lead us in prayer? And he said, Oh, certainly. Let's take a moment to quiet ourselves, bow our heads, and pray. And then he stopped and he was quiet, I kid you not, for about 60 seconds, which is an eternity in cyberspace. I thought maybe I lost my connection a little bit, but I could see he was being very prayerful. And so in our own faith formation sessions, perhaps before we open the textbook, let's all stand and pray in 15 seconds of silence for inspiration. Open our minds and our hearts, Lord, to what we're about to read. During prayers, after a scripture reading, to take a moment of silence. Okay? I expound on these in the book. Storytelling, telling our stories of where we are encountering the presence of God in this world, how following Jesus is affecting us. So, stories not only from Scripture, not only from the lives of the saints, but from our own lives. Don't be afraid of that, folks. That's why you're so desperately needed. Tell your unique stories. including movement and gesture, processions in your room. Not only the sign of the cross, but the threefold sign of the cross on our forehead, lips, and heart. Bowing before the Bible that is enthroned in your midst, and so on. These are all very important ways that we express ourselves as Catholics, and these speak to us. Signs and symbols, making sure that you have sacred objects, a Bible stand, a bowl of holy water, a flameless candle, an icon of the Blessed Virgin Mary, and to let young people and participants handle these objects, carry them in procession, place them on a prayer table, and so on. Creating rituals, in other words, the things that I just talked about doing with those sacred objects, doing them the same way every week. So that it establishes a sameness to it. That ritual speaks to us of permanency. And that's an important part of the steadfastness of God's love. We use ritual to say it never changes. That love is always the same. It's always there for us. And then finally, works of mercy. Um, that's a way that we touch hearts without speaking words. We just perform actions, actions of love. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. With that in mind, I have a poll question about one of these. We certainly don't have time to talk about all of them. Well, let's talk about music. So this poll question is inviting you to talk about how often do you incorporate music into your sessions? A, never. B, rarely. C, occasionally. D, frequently. And E, all the time. I've already showed my hand, Denise. I'm a big music person, play a lot of music in my sessions. Again, how about you? And has it always been the way, or has that changed over the years?
I don't think the amount has actually changed all that much. I've always sort of been occasional, meaning I use it in some sessions, but not in all sessions. And I tend to use more of the Catholic songbook, the sorts of things we might hear at Mass, or perhaps a praise and worship song that fits the theme of the lesson.
And I highly recommend that. And these songs are available to us. You can develop your own playlists, go and search online for these, get some help from your catechetical leader in terms of where to find these. And yeah, having songs that they're going to recognize when they go to Mass, when they go to church. So there's a connection between what they're hearing when they're with you and then when they go to Mass. So 8% of our folks are telling us that they never do. And I would encourage you to think about how important music is to us Catholics. We make a big deal out of singing when we gather for Mass. Well, why not for our catechetical sessions as well? 21% say rarely. I encourage you to bump that up. And then we have the majority of our folks here, 35%, like you, Denise, occasional. It's there, maybe not all the time. 22% frequently. That's a pretty good chunk. And 14%, that's a pretty good chunk too. So, we have 30, 50, 60, almost 65% of our folks are really incorporating music. So again, I encourage you to do this. And I'm not berating anyone who's not using it. I just want to help you to think about this can help you. Music, young people listen to music. I believe there's a study that said that like junior high, young people listen like 3 hours a day of music. It's an important part of their lives. So let's keep that in mind, folks. A couple more ways that you can establish this climate of prayer is by engaging in what's called Visio Divina, by showing a piece of sacred art, maybe putting on some music, and then just letting them stare at that work of art and what does it say to them, and they can maybe journal about it or pray about it, or afterwards you can talk about it as well. Loyola Press has these beautiful exploring faith through art easels that you can use for Visio Divina. And then finally, we did talk a little bit about guided reflections and how we help our learners to spend some time with Jesus in prayer. And in doing that, we help to facilitate encounters with our Lord. All right, a couple more, and then we're going to get ready for Q&A. If you have a question, please go to the Q&A section and the Q&A feature and write that question in. Denise is sorting through those and getting ready for us. But a couple more quick things I want to encourage you to use as tools. Our learners today are experiencing a lot of social fragmentation, polarization, brokenness in our world. We're in a streak right now that is very painful for all of us. How can we as catechists provide an antidote, respond by emphasizing our solidarity, connectivity, common ground, purpose? I encourage you to think about how you, as a catechist, can encourage and involve your learners in service to others. Well, the new directory calls it catechesis in action. It really helps them to experience this notion of solidarity and connectivity, meaning, purpose. Perhaps set up a video conference with us, with young people on the other side of the world. Maybe you can find, a teacher, a Catholic school teacher or a catechist in another country where you can set up a time to do a Zoom and have children in your class who are preparing for First Communion meet children in a class in Mexico or South America or Africa who are preparing for First Communion as well. Wouldn't that be incredible? You can Zoom with a significant person, have them, instead of being a guest speaker in person, spend 10, 15 minutes doing a Zoom. Ask the bishop, perhaps, if he can make an appearance through Zoom. Perhaps the coordinator of Catholic Charities in your diocese, the coordinator of Catholic Relief Services. So you can have guest speakers in your room without having them actually come in person. All right. Another thing that we need to respond to is the fact that our many of our young people today, because of technology, are experiencing some sense of feeling isolated and lonely. It seems counterintuitive. Technology was supposed to bring us all together, and yet it sometimes is making us isolated and lonely. And so it's up to us as catechists to create and maintain an authentic sense of community in our learning settings. I want to give you a couple of tools that can help. One is by when you begin your year together with your learners, establish trust. Establish what we call a classroom covenant. It's kind of like our statement of these are the rules we're going to abide by. We're going to commit and promise to showing respect to one another by using kind words, um, by listening, giving everyone a chance to talk, by not laughing at each other. And you invite your learners to add to this so that they help to um, put this together and then have them sign their names to it, kind of like, the Declaration of Independence. You can do that rather prayerfully to have them sign their names at the bottom. And then you post this every time we gather. And then when someone violates that, you can say, that's not what we promised to. We all committed to this. And you can point out where that's in the classroom covenant. And then another thing, and I spent a lot of time in the Catechist Toolbox 2.0 talking about this, is cooperative learning and group work. This is a very powerful way of establishing community, helping learners to get to know each other, helping them to learn how to do things collaboratively. Um, Again, I don't have the time to go through too many details right now, but I devote a great deal of attention to this in the Catechist Toolbox 2.0. One of the most powerful skills tools that we can have in our toolbox. Folks, wow, I'm almost out of breath. There's so much that we covered, and this is just skimming the tip of the iceberg of what's available in the Catechist Toolbox 2.0. But I want to end this webinar before we do Q&A with the way I begin the Toolbox 2.0, and it is by asking you a question. And we're going to do this in the form of a poll question. While let's talk about technology. That we did. I just want to ask you straight up, do you think that robots can replace you? You know, we got so much wonderful technology, and AI can do so many wonderful things, and it can get things right where we may not be able to recall things properly. Maybe they should just replace Catechist. What do you think? A, absolutely, yes. B, possibly. C, probably not. And D, absolutely not. Um, Denise, I'm going to ask you to share your answer. Where would you fall on this?
I think I'm falling where the majority of people are falling as I see the results coming in now. Absolutely not. I mean, we still need human beings with heart. God created us to be human, not to be robots. So we need to be our human selves to help facilitate those encounters with Jesus.
Well said. And we can expound on that if we had the time. But yes, a robot cannot be divinized. A robot cannot have a relationship with Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit. And we can go on. I do believe, and this is how I would answer it, I would agree with you. I would say absolutely no. I do believe that robots might become catechist aids at some point. I think it might be kind of cool at some point for a catechist to say, "Hey, let's get Robbie Robot to come in here and let's have a quiz game." And the robot might run a quiz game where we're reviewing material. I think that would be fun. I think young people, even adults, would enjoy that, get a kick out of it. But if, then we have to set that aside and say, now let's talk from the heart. And what does this mean to me? And how has it changed my life? And so on. So I kind of expected this result. 85% say absolutely not. In person, I have some people get almost angry that I'm even asking this question because and by that, they're not angry with me. They're defending the fact that no, a human being is how we transform other human beings. And they feel so strongly about it. So 9% said probably not, and 5% said possibly, and 1% said absolutely yes. We'll have a conversation with you. Now, seriously, I would love to hear your thinking on that if we had time. But think about what Denise said, what I just said about how technology can help us, but our directory tells us that the person of the catechist is irreplaceable. And so it's on that thought that I'm going to stop and turn it over to Denise. And I'm sure that we got a question or two, and I'm ready. Bring them on, Denise.
All right. So we'll start with Lorinda, who says, our classrooms are next to the 24-hour adoration chapel. Would it make sense for one chunk each week to be visiting the chapel, or is it better to stay in the classroom and pray there? We'd lose time transitioning to and from the chapel, so I'm not sure if that's good for chunking or bad.
I think it would be well worth the time to take them to an adoration chapel. I think that's one of the beautiful practices that we have as Catholics. It fits in with everything that I just said, that we have to be the people and the venue that draws them away from screen time to time. And this is a tradition that we have had. We didn't make it up in response to screen time. We have always, as Catholics, felt that it was important to just sit in silence before the Blessed Sacrament. I think that's time well spent, even if it's, movement back and forth. Definitely think that's time with spent and something worth doing.
Great, thank you. So Mike asks if you could maybe share a better example to help him understand how Icebreaker works within the religious education classroom.
Yeah, I tell a story a lot of times of a session that I did with fourth graders on conscience and how God shapes our conscience. And so I went out and the icebreaker I did was just bringing in little cans of Play-Doh. And I passed those out and I had them, I said, shape something. And I kept using the word shape. Shape this, shape that, shape a figure, shape, show us your shapes and so on. And so they put together their little things, then they showed what they created, little dogs, cats, and trees and animals and so on. And then I talked about, what would happen if that clay got hard? Oh, well, you can't shape it so well. And then I used that. So they had fun, we engaged in something that got them engaged. And then we use that to say, well, today we're going to learn about how our hearts are like that. Our hearts can be shaped. And there's even a phrase in scripture that says, harden not your hearts because then it cannot be shaped. So that's what I mean by, find an activity that will help teach a lesson. You can explore online, look up games, you can get books on this and so on. But a lot of times you have to do the homework of making the connection. And I tend to work backwards on that is I want to talk about shape. What do we shape? Clay. Let's maybe play with clay. Okay, so you start with what you're teaching and then look for a game, an icebreaker that will help to reinforce that. I hope that makes sense.
It does to me, so I'm sure
Okay,
it's helpful to Mike as well.
good.
Um,
Thanks, Mike.
Jackie asks, do you think these ideas will work equally as well with OCIA groups or prayer groups, as well as with children and adolescents?
Absolutely, yes. I firmly believe that a lot of what I present and a lot of what I'm writing about in the 2.0 is inspired by the catechumenate. I ran the catechumenate, participated in the catechumenate for many years when I was in parish ministry. And much of what I do as a catechist comes out of that experience because the OCIA is a liturgical rite with catechesis embedded within it. It is not a class. And so that taught me something really. We have sessions, but when I say it's not a class, it's not an academic course. It's a liturgical rite, prayerful, meditative, thoughtful, sacramental, mystagogical, within which we present catechesis. So I would not hesitate to say yes. If you're moving from a traditional setting into the OCIA, that's where I got it from in the first place.
Great. I think maybe this will probably be the last one we have time
Okay.
for. So I'm going to rephrase it a little. How do
Okay.
you handle situations of classroom management, particularly in a time when like students are just not following directions and have no focus?
And who's that from? Tell us, do you have a name?
I just have anonymous with that one.
Okay, well, anonymous. You're asking a question that probably almost every catechist is thinking. It's one of our biggest challenges. I didn't really address it in this particular webinar, but there's an entire chapter in the Catechist Toolbox 2.0, just like the original, about the importance of discipline and the tools that we use. And I'm going to share what I think is a couple of the most important tools. One is, I'm probably going to do three. The first one is lots of planning and preparation. We can avoid a lot of discipline problems if we have a great plan that engages them from the moment they walk in. And so if they say an idle mind is the devil's playground. Don't give Satan a chance to jump into their heads and tempt them to misbehave. The moment they walk in, give them something that they're engaged in. The second thing is that when addressing discipline, try not to interrupt your class. Try not to interrupt your flow. If someone is messing around over here, move over there and keep talking while you go and stand behind them and you breathe down their neck and they know you're there. And you can even tap the table next to them or maybe even just tap their shoulder very lightly. Let them know I'm on to you and I would like you to stop doing that without interrupting yourself. The third thing I'll share, and then I'll end there and send you to the book to find more, is what I call evangelizing discipline. Never hesitate to stop and to remind them why we're here. And if there's misbehaving going on, to say, we're here to learn about Jesus Christ, and his message is very important to me. And I want that to be important to you. And I'm getting the impression right now that it's not. So can we stop that? I call that evangelizing discipline. Remind them why they should be behaving because you think that Jesus is their savior and is bringing a life-saving message to them, and you really want them to have that because you treasure it. I hope that gives you a taste of what I do in an entire chapter. Discipline is incredibly important um, because it's the same root word as disciple. It's how we learn to follow Jesus. It requires discipline. So thank you, Anonymous, and everyone else for thinking of that question, and Denise for phrasing it for us.
Okay. So,
Okay,
Joe,
so yeah, we're approaching the end here, Denise, and I just want to share one more thing before I send it back to you to wrap things up. Um, and I mentioned this earlier. Everything that was in the original Catechist Toolbox is here in the new one. I spent a lot of time in this one focusing on how we respond to technology, but that is just sort of an opening thrust to the book. If you really liked the old toolbox, you're going to love the 2.0 because it's all there, it's all updated, it's sharpened, it's embellished. And but it also has lots of new things. There's a new chapter on catechumenal catechesis, a new chapter on evangelizing catechesis, a whole new chapter on connecting with parents that wasn't there before, a whole new chapter on catechist formation. And you might be wondering, how did I redo the book with all this new stuff and it's still almost the same size? We took some of the material, and in every chapter, there's a QR code. And you can scan the QR code, and most of them will take you to a video of me talking more. And so we are able to get you all that same content without doubling the size and the price of the book. So I just wanted to share that, Denise, with everyone. I'm excited about the book. I'm thrilled to have had this opportunity to share it. Catechist, God bless you. You're the most wonderful people in the world. You need tools, and we're going to be better catechists if our toolbox is growing. I hope that I and my book, The Catechist Toolbox 2.0, will help you and your toolbox to grow. So thank you. God bless. I'm going to turn it over to Denise to wrap things up.
okay. Joe, thank you so much for sharing this time with us and helping us to understand the changing nature of catechesis.
You're welcome.
And thank you to all of our listeners joining us today. You can learn more in Joe's book, The Catechist Toolbox 2.0, Building Today's Missionary Disciples. The book is available from Loyola Press. You'll see on the screen a QR code and a website address to learn more and order. And our phone number is 800-621-1008 if you want to talk to a real person during business hours. A recording of this webinar will be available soon at loyolapress.com, and the link will be sent to you if you're listening live and registered ahead of time. We invite you to share the link with others who might benefit from the message. And on behalf of Joe and everyone at Loyola Press, I'm Denise Gorse. We wish you a blessed day.